There's a whisper that drifts through the grand halls of history, a faint, persistent echo, often drowned out by the clash of swords, the proclamations of kings, and the thunder of empires. It's the whisper of half the human story, a narrative so profoundly vital, yet so habitually overlooked that it has become almost an act of rediscovery. We speak of the Middle Ages, and immediately images spring to mind: knights in shining armor, towering cathedrals, brutal sieges. But what if I told you that the true heart of survival, the very pulse of existence during those tumultuous centuries, beat not on the battlefield, but in the calloused hands and resilient spirit of a woman? What if the gritty, unglamorous truth of daily life, the secret to enduring a world both breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly brutal, lay hidden in the routines of a peasant woman? Forget the damsels in distress, the cloistered nuns, the queens on their thrones. Those are but fleeting shadows. We are going deeper, into the earth itself, into the smoke-filled hovels, into the very sinews of survival. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that you are not reading these words in the comfort of your modern world, but are instead waking to the gnawing chill of a dawn that has not yet broken. The air in your lungs is thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and something else, a faint, persistent odor of unwashed bodies and animal warmth. This is your home, a single-room dwelling, perhaps woven from wattle and daub, its roof a thatch of straw that harbors insects and the occasional scuttling mouse. There is no glass in your window openings, only wooden shutters closed against the predatory cold of the night. Your bed is a straw-filled sack, shared with your husband and perhaps a small child. The quiet hum of the sleeping world around you is punctuated by the rhythmic breathing of your family, the soft rustle of straw, and the distant, mournful cry of an owl. This, my friends, is the bedrock of your existence. This is where survival truly begins. The very first struggle, the foundational challenge, was simply to be, to draw breath and hold on to it against an array of invisible enemies. For a woman, this struggle began with her own birth, a perilous journey into a world where a third of all infants would not see their first birthday, and a terrifying number of mothers would perish in the act of giving life. Childbirth was not a medical event, it was a communal rite, a primal struggle between life and death conducted in the same smoky hut where daily life unfolded. No sterile instruments, no anesthetics, no trained physicians, only the wisdom of generations of women passed down through whispered stories and practiced hands. A midwife, often an older woman from the village, would be summoned, her knowledge a precious inheritance. She might offer prayers, herbal concoctions to ease the pain or hasten the delivery, and words of encouragement. But ultimately, it was the woman herself, drawing upon reserves of strength she barely knew she possessed, who wrestled new life into being.
Consider the stark reality of it. The pain, the fear, the exhaustion, all magnified by the constant threat of infection, hemorrhage, or a malpositioned child. And if she survived, if the child drew its first fragile breath, the work had only just begun. The baby would be wrapped in swaddling clothes, its tiny face nestled against its mother's breast, its very life dependent on her milk. But this was not a time for prolonged rest and recovery. The fields called, the hearth needed tending, the animals demanded care. Within days, sometimes hours, the woman would be back at her endless tasks, her body still aching, her spirit still reeling from the profound ordeal she had just endured. Her womb, a crucible of life, was also a testament to her unending resilience. Let us follow her then, as the first pale light of dawn filters through the shuttered openings. Her husband stirs beside her, his body a familiar weight. Her children, if she has any old enough, are already rustling. The hearth, where a few embers still glow from the previous night, is her first priority. With practiced hands, she coaxes the embers back to life, adding kindling and then larger pieces of wood. The smoke, thick and acrid, fills the small space before finding its way out through the smoke hole in the roof. This fire is more than just a source of warmth. It is the beating heart of the home, essential for cooking, for boiling water, a rare luxury, but sometimes done for rudimentary washing or brewing, and for drying herbs or clothes. Her morning routine, like 1,000 others across the continent, is a quiet symphony of necessity. She fetches water from the communal well or stream, often a considerable distance, carrying heavy buckets on a yoke across her shoulders or balanced on her head. The chill of the morning air bites at her exposed skin, but her pace is steady, her movements efficient. This water is not just for drinking. It is for washing the few dishes, for preparing the meager morning meal, and for the occasional rudimentary personal hygiene. Soap, as we know it, was a luxury. Instead, lye from ashes might be used, or simply vigorous scrubbing with rough cloth. The scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and sweat clings to her, an inescapable part of her existence. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is often a thin pottage made from whatever grains are available: oats, barley, rye, boiled with water and perhaps a few dried vegetables or herbs. Meat is a rarity, reserved for feast days or after a successful hunt, which was generally a man's pursuit. Dairy products like cheese or curds might supplement the meal if the family owned a cow or goats. This food, bland and monotonous by modern standards, was fuel. It provided the energy needed for the relentless physical labor that awaited her. There was no time for culinary delights or varied diets. Survival dictated simplicity. Once the morning meal is consumed, the real work begins, a ceaseless rhythm dictated by the seasons and the demands of the land. For the peasant woman, her life was inextricably bound to the earth, a partner in its cycles of growth and decay. In spring, she would be in the fields alongside her husband, preparing the soil for planting. This was not the light tilling of a modern garden. This was back-breaking labor, breaking up clods of earth with a heavy hoe, clearing stones, pulling weeds by hand. Her hands, rough and calloused, knew the feel of every clod, every stubborn root. Her back, perpetually aching, bore the strain of endless bending.
Summer brought the relentless struggle against weeds and pests and the arduous task of harvesting. Imagine the sun beating down on your neck, sweat stinging your eyes as you wield a sickle, cutting stalks of grain hour after hour. The air is thick with dust and chaff, your lungs burning. The rhythmic swish of the sickle, the rustle of falling grain, the low hum of insects, these are the sounds of your summer. Each sheaf of grain represents not just food, but survival through the harsh winter months. Every kernel is precious, gathered with painstaking care. And even after the grain is harvested, the work continues. It must be threshed to separate the grain from the stalks, then winnowed to remove the chaff. These are communal tasks, often performed by groups of women, their laughter and chatter a faint counterpoint to the arduous labor. Autumn was a season of preservation and preparation. As the days shortened and the chill returned, the focus shifted to securing enough food and fuel for the lean months ahead. Root vegetables, if grown, would be carefully stored in cool, dark cellars or pits. Wild berries and nuts, gathered during the summer and early autumn, would be dried or preserved with honey, if available. Firewood, painstakingly gathered from the nearby woods, had to be chopped and stacked, each log a promise of warmth against the creeping cold. The scent of wood smoke would now be a constant companion, clinging to clothes, hair, and skin. And then came winter, the season of reckoning.
This was the time when the careful planning and relentless labor of the warmer months were put to the ultimate test. Food supplies would dwindle, the cold would penetrate even the thickest clothing, and illness would sweep through communities with devastating speed. For the peasant woman, winter brought a different kind of labor. Inside the dim confines of her hut, she would spin wool into yarn, her fingers nimble and practiced. The rhythmic whir of the spindle, the soft scratch of the wool, were the sounds of her winter evenings. This yarn would then be woven into cloth on a rudimentary loom or knitted into stockings and caps. Every stitch, every thread was a defense against the biting cold, a small victory against the harsh realities of her world. Her needlework was not a hobby, it was a fundamental act of survival. Clothes were repaired again and again, patched until they were more patched than original fabric. Nothing was wasted. Scraps of cloth might be repurposed into rags or used for quilting. Even after a long day in the fields, or tending to children, or collecting fuel, her hands would continue to move, her eyes straining in the flickering light of the hearth or a rushlight, a simple wick soaked in animal fat. The very warmth on her family's backs, the very integrity of their meager garments depended entirely on her tireless industry. But her duties extended far beyond the immediate confines of her home and the demands of the fields. The peasant woman was the primary caregiver for her children, a demanding and often heartbreaking role. As we've mentioned, infant mortality was tragically high. She would witness the fragile lives of her babies snuffed out by illness, by accident, by the sheer indifference of a harsh world. And yet she would mourn, pick up the pieces, and continue to nurture those who remained. She taught her daughters the skills of the household, the secrets of hearth and home, the rhythms of the seasons. She taught her sons the basics of survival, instilling in them the respect for the land and the animals that would sustain their lives. Her lullabies were sung in hushed tones, her stories woven from the fabric of their lives, steeped in folklore and the practical wisdom of generations.
Beyond her immediate family, the peasant woman was an integral part of the village community. While men might gather for counsel or discuss matters of wider import, women formed their own networks, their own systems of support and exchange. They would assist each other in childbirth, share knowledge of herbal remedies, lend a hand during harvests, and offer comfort in times of sorrow. They exchanged eggs for milk, a handful of dried beans for a few carefully hoarded needles. These informal economies, built on trust and mutual need, were the bedrock of social survival. Gossip, too, played its part, a vital means of communication and social control, though perhaps not always for the best. Let's delve into one of these mini-stories, a glimpse into the emotional landscape of her life. Imagine a woman named Ilera, living in a small village nestled beside a slow-moving river. It is late autumn, and the air carries the biting promise of winter. Ilera's youngest child, a 2-year-old girl named Lyra, has been restless and feverish for days. Her breath is shallow, her small body hot to the touch. Ilera has tried everything: warm compresses, a poultice of herbs on her chest, whispered prayers to the saints. But Lyra only grows weaker. Her husband, Thomas, watches with a grim, helpless expression. His strong hands, so capable in the fields, useless against this unseen foe. Ilera remembers her grandmother's stories of the fever herb, a rare plant said to grow only on the shaded north face of the highest hill, far beyond their village lands. It is a dangerous journey, especially with the days shortening and the wolves beginning to range closer to human settlements. But the thought of Lyra's fading breath spurs her. One cold gray morning, while Thomas is in the woods gathering fuel, Ilera wraps Lyra carefully in a warm blanket, lays her gently beside the dying embers of the fire, and entrusts her to the care of her eldest daughter, a solemn girl of 9. She takes her worn leather pouch, a rough stick for support, and a desperate hope in her heart. The journey is grueling. Her feet ache. The cold seeps into her bones. She imagines Lyra's small hand in hers, the feel of her warm cheek against her own. This vision propels her forward. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, Ilara finally reaches the crest of the hill. Her eyes scan the darkening ground, searching, praying. And then there it is, a cluster of small, dark leaves, distinct even in the fading light. She falls to her knees, tears blurring her vision, and carefully digs the plant from the frozen earth. The journey back is even harder, her body screaming with fatigue, but her spirit lifted by a fragile hope. She arrives back in the village well after dark, her family anxiously waiting. Lyra is weaker, her breathing barely perceptible. With trembling hands, Ilara brews a potent tea from the herb, coaxing small sips into Lyra's mouth. The night is long, filled with anxious vigil. But as the first light of dawn touches the window opening, she sees it, a flicker of recognition in Lyra's eyes, a slight easing of her shallow breath. The fever has broken. The child will live. Ilara collapses, utterly spent, but a profound, silent gratitude washes over her. This was the strength of a medieval mother, born of fierce love and an unyielding will to survive.
Another mini-story, this time focusing on social survival. Meet Agnes, a woman in her late 20s whose husband, a blacksmith, had tragically died of a fever, leaving her with 3 young children and little in the way of land or resources. In the harsh realities of the Middle Ages, a widow with no male protector was profoundly vulnerable. Agnes faced a terrifying prospect of destitution, her children condemned to a life of begging or forced labor. But Agnes was not helpless. She possessed a skill, passed down from her own mother and grandmother. She was a skilled weaver. Her hands could transform raw wool into intricate patterns, creating sturdy cloth for cloaks and tunics, or finer linens for the wealthy. The village men, respectful of her late husband but wary of extra mouths to feed, initially offered little help. It was the women who rallied. A group of older women, knowing the plight of a widow, offered her a corner of a shared field to grow a small patch of flax. Another brought her some spare wool. Slowly, painstakingly, Agnes began to weave. She worked tirelessly, the rhythmic thud of the loom a constant presence in her small hut. Her children, too young to work the fields, learned to help with the simpler tasks, winding yarn, sorting fibers. Agnes would take her finished cloth to the weekly market in the nearby town, her heart pounding with anxiety. Sometimes she would sell a piece, sometimes not, but she persevered. And as her reputation for fine weaving grew, orders began to trickle in. The local lord's wife commissioned a new gown. The Reeves family needed new blankets. Agnes's survival was not just about her skill, but about her ingenuity, her relentless effort, and the quiet, often unacknowledged support system of women around her. They shared resources, knowledge, and above all, resilience. Her story is a testament to the fact that while medieval society was undeniably patriarchal, women found ways to carve out agency, to build networks of support, and to survive, not just individually, but communally. They were not just passive recipients of their fate, they were active architects of their survival. Her relationship with her own body was also fundamentally different from ours. Pregnancy was a frequent, almost inevitable part of her married life, often beginning shortly after puberty. Birth control, as we know it, was non-existent. Miscarriages were common, often seen as an act of God or a sign of moral failing. Her body was a vessel for labor,
for childbirth, for sustenance. It was a tool, honed by endless physical exertion. There was little concept of leisure, of pampering, of self-care in the modern sense. Her aches and pains were simply part of the landscape of her existence, endured with a stoicism born of necessity. Even sleep, that most basic of human needs, was a different experience. A medieval peasant woman's sleep was often fragmented, punctuated by the cries of a baby, the demands of a sick child, or the need to tend to the fire. Her bed, a simple straw pallet, offered little comfort, and the nights themselves were filled with a profound darkness, an absolute void of light only broken by the flickering flame of the hearth or a rushlight. This darkness was not just an absence of light, it was a presence, filled with the imagined terrors of the unknown, with superstitions and whispers of malevolent spirits. Yet she would sink into sleep, a heavy, exhausted slumber, preparing her body for the relentless demands of the coming day. Consider the role of storytelling, of oral tradition in her life. Without books, without widespread literacy, knowledge was passed down through the spoken word. As she spun wool by the fire or gathered herbs in the woods, she would tell her children the old stories of saints and sinners, of heroes and villains, of magical creatures and cautionary tales. These stories were not just entertainment, they were repositories of wisdom, moral instruction, and historical memory. They provided a framework for understanding the world, a connection to generations past. Her voice, hushed and resonant in the dim light, was a conduit for cultural transmission, weaving threads of knowledge into the fabric of her children's minds. Let's step into another moment, a sensory immersion. It is early spring. The earth, still cold and damp from winter's lingering embrace, smells of rich, dark soil and the promise of new growth. You are kneeling in a newly plowed field, the rough texture of the earth beneath your bare knees. Your hands, still raw from winter's chill, plunge into the soil, planting tiny seeds, wheat, barley, or rye. The seeds are small, almost insignificant, yet in them lies the potential for life, for survival. The air is crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from distant hearths and the sharp, clean smell of burgeoning green. A lone lark sings high above, its song a piercingly sweet counterpoint to the quiet intensity of your labor. This moment, this intimate connection with the earth, is the very essence of her existence. It is a dance between hope and fear, between effort and surrender to the whims of nature. The constant battle against illness and disease was a relentless, often losing fight. Without understanding of germs or sanitation, minor cuts could fester into life-threatening infections. Fevers, coughs, and digestive ailments were common and often fatal. Her remedies were simple: herbal concoctions, poultices, and prayers. She would tend to her sick, offering what comfort she could, her heart heavy with the knowledge that many would not recover. The burial ground was a constant reminder of the fragility of life, the ever-present shadow of death. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, her spirit of care and nurturing endured.
The peasant woman's relationship with her husband was also complex. It was a partnership of necessity, forged in the crucible of shared labor and mutual dependence. Love, in the romantic sense, may or may not have been present, but respect, cooperation, and a deep understanding of shared purpose were essential for survival. They relied on each other for everything: for strength in the fields, for comfort in the long nights, for companionship in a world that could be profoundly lonely. His strength was her security, her resilience, his anchor. They were two halves of a whole, bound together by the relentless demands of existence.